Like all of Hollywood these days, Disney Plus is betting pretty big on nostalgia, and Disney has a very deep bench. They're doing the animated classics as live action for theatrical release, and even a couple of Disney Plus movies now. Apparently the less good ones are going to Disney Plus. But then also they're bringing back some of their live action moderate hits that have become cult classics over the decades. We're talking Hocus Pocus 2, and then this very week, Disenchanted and the Santa Claus is back as a series. And it was even recently announced that they're going to do another Princess Diaries, where Anne Hathaway may or may not return. But speaking of talent, Lindsay Lohan and Jamie Lee Curtis are campaigning pretty aggressively for another Freaky Friday, which just might happen, although we'll see. Now, this nostalgia craze on Disney Plus specifically started out very strong with Hocus Pocus 2, a light and fun movie chock full of nostalgia. And as I said in my review, it wasn't theater worthy, but it was a heck of a lot better than most direct-to-streaming movies. And it did big viewership numbers, setting a new record for the debut of an original movie on streaming. Ka-ching! Which is why I think Lindsay Lohan and Jamie Lee Curtis just might have a chance, and Disney might be willing to write a big enough check to bring back Anne Hathaway. But let's put a pin in that, because just about a month later, here's Disenchanted, and I have to say the nostalgia kick is already starting to wear pretty thin, at least for me. I was like, oh, wait a minute, I don't know if I want that many of these. Especially since Disenchanted is not at all theater worthy. I mean, at least Hocus Pocus 2 seemed to be shot on location inside and out. But many of the interiors on Disenchanted feel like a Disney Channel movie. You know what I mean. I wasn't a big fan, to be fair, of the original Enchanted. Although, looking back, and this Disenchanted did make me go click on Enchanted on Disney Plus, which is available right now. For comparison's sake, I was like, maybe this is on par with Enchanted, because I don't remember particularly caring for that either. Enchanted is much better, much more theatrical. And also, this made me realize, looking back, hindsight's 2020, that this is the Disney princess version of Elf. I was like, what do you know? And sure enough, this came out 4 years. Enchanted came out 4 years after Elf. And I do wonder if Elf was the inspiration for this. It really is kind of like the female girly equivalent of Elf, which is fascinating to me. Enchanted not only made Amy Adams a star, but was famous for its 2D animated sequences. And then infamous for disappearing from the Disney empire, which loves to use its hits, but conspicuously didn't use this one because the mouse didn't want to have to pay Amy Adams for the use of her likeness. Now, like 15 years later, it's been 15 years since the first film, it seems that Disney and Adams were able to come into an agreement because Disney needs a lot of Disney Plus content, and Adams has had a particularly bad run of movies as of late. So she's like, you know what? I will come back. She's a producer on this, and apparently she's not a very good producer. All right, so anyway, to Disenchanted's credit, it does have 2D animated sequences, which is still a lot of fun. I miss 2D animation, as does everybody. Why won't somebody make a 2D animated film? I mean, I guess it's the time and expense, but I think if Disney were to put an effort into it, it could maybe do really well. I mean, talk about something that could do very well on Disney Plus. All right, anyway, they have some. I think the Tiana animated series might be 2D, hopefully. I love Princess and the Frog, the last 2D animated film. All right, so anyway, where Disenchanted really falters, though, besides the sitcom-level production design and some truly awful and instantly forgettable songs from Alan Menken and Stephen Schwartz. I can't believe this is what they delivered. I was like, wow, if you didn't want to do this project, you just should have told me. I thought the songs were awful, but maybe like hardcore musical theater fans who like the Broadway, twisting of those songs might like this. I thought it was awful. I was like, these songs are horrible. But anyway, where it really falls short, besides that stuff, is the script. Oh, what a stinker, by Bridget Hale, who comes from the ABC Once Upon a Time writer's room, which I think explains a lot. No offense to, well, I guess it is kind of offensive to Once Upon a Time fans, but come on, that was a network sitcom show about fairy tales, and this seems like a network movie about fairy tales instead of something that's supposed to be at least partially theatrical. Theater worthy. The film does have one very clever idea, and that is that Giselle, now a stepmother, is in danger of becoming the evil fairy tale version of a stepmother. That's all I'll say. I don't want to spoil the few surprises that there are. But it was disappointing, though, to see this sequel discard all of Giselle's non-family ambitions from the original movie, like the children's clothing line that she starts. I mean, I didn't even remember that, but when I went back to look at the original movie, I fast-forwarded through a lot of it. I was like, oh yeah, I remember why I didn't like this. But at the end, I was like, oh yeah, she started a children's clothing line. What happened to that? I mean, the whole point of taking Giselle out of the animated fairy tale was to allow her to be a more live-action dynamic person, you know, who had interests besides just falling in love and having a family, but still valued those, but, you know, had her own goals. So it was weird that they got rid of that. Also, it was very clever in the original film to make Patrick Dempsey's character a divorce lawyer who didn't believe in true love. Are you seeing the elf comparisons here? This is really funny. But that was brilliant. But here, he has absolutely nothing to do. Nothing. They have one little commentary on commuting, and I'm like, they didn't even do anything with that. All right. There are still some nice elements, though, that do make Disenchanted watchable. You can watch it. I did fall asleep. But then I got up and rewound and rewatched what I missed. But Amy Adams is still a delight as Giselle, her signature role, and she gives it her all, revisiting that role, even though she's gone on to become a celebrated award-nominated actress. 6 Oscar nominations, and she still respected this project, which I respect. Maya Rudolph is also a nice addition, channeling the evil queen, interestingly enough, from Once Upon a Time. I was like, is that the same dress? You know, like, that's very similar. Although, it's weird that the role isn't at all comedic, despite casting an SNL alum like Maya Rudolph. I'm like, you have a great comedian, why isn't this a comedic role? And while the interior sets are lacking, the exterior sets, many of them in Ireland and England, are absolutely stunning. They have some of the most incredible floral arrangements and gardens that I've ever seen in live action. Part of me wonders if they're even real. I'm like, is that a really convincing CGI garden? But if Disney wanted to open an enchanted chain of cafes in their theme parks, you know, you haven't lived until you've had British high tea. I was like, what is this cream on a scone? And someone was like, try it with a little bit of jam. And I was like, this looks bad, but it was delicious. So I'm really now a big fan of English tea. So that would be wonderful to have enchanted tea rooms in the theme parks with this kind of like barfing up fantasy floral arrangements all over the place. It would be amazing. I would be like, let's do that right now. And I think that when Disenchanted was the most fun for me was when it seemed like a pretty convincing live-action version of Tangled, at least taking place in that same world. I was like, I bet you could do Rapunzel's hair if you can do this. So that was nice. As you can see, I wasn't totally thinking about the movie I was watching. Anyway, finally, Gabriella Baldacchino takes over as Giselle's stepdaughter Morgan, and unfortunately just isn't as engaging as Adams and Rudolph. She just can't compete. And her storyline doesn't do her any favors either. She's a difficult teenager who didn't want to move to the suburbs. That's pretty cliche. And also, it's not even really explored. Instead, it's just a flimsy setup for Giselle to try and fix things. But of course, Giselle only makes things worse, because we're talking sitcom level writing here. James Marsden and Idina Menzel are also both back, with Menzel having some fierce bangs. I was like, those bangs are a choice, and I'm liking it. But they're not used very much, only sparingly. Menzel does get a song, which is done again over the end credits. I like the end credit version better than the one in the movie. I was like, I don't like the song. But the one over the end credits, I actually thought the end credit scene was one of the best times in the movie. I was like, oh, these graphics are nice. Although they reused the VFX animation from the cat and the squirrel in the end credits. And I was like, you think I would notice that that's the exact same movement they did in the movie and you cheaped out and just placed it on top of that pedestal? That stuff like that really bothers me. All right, so Menzel, I think she did a better take on Material Girl and Cinderella on Amazon last year. I know that film ended up being very controversial because of Camila Cabello's comments, but if you just look at that film itself, when it comes to modern fairy tales, I liked that jukebox musical a lot more than what I would describe as a somewhat stale, overly sugary supermarket cupcake. And you know exactly what I'm talking about. That is what Disenchanted is like. So that's my review of Disenchanted, which hit Disney Plus today, and I think Disney knows that they're serving up a stale, overly sugary cupcake from the supermarket because the review embargo lifted. Although I think that was the same for Hocus Pocus. No, I think Hocus Pocus lifted a few days earlier, but they didn't want any reviews getting out in front of this. All right, so share your thoughts down below, subscribe today, and of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.